The burlap sack in the corner of the stagecoach had been moving for the past mile, but Marshal Miles Ingram had pretended not to notice, focusing instead on the endless stretches of Nevada desert rolling past the window. It was 1875, and he was escorting a prisoner, though not the kind anyone would expect. The young woman sitting across from him had barely spoken since they'd left Carson City 3 hours ago, her delicate hands folded primly in her lap, despite the handcuffs encircling her wrists. "Don't open the sack," she said suddenly, her eyes flicking toward the corner where the rough fabric twitched again. "Please." It was the first complete sentence she'd uttered since he'd arrested her. Olivia Whitman wanted for theft in 3 territories if the posters were to be believed. Miles found that hard to reconcile with the refined woman before him, whose proper speech and fine, if dusty, traveling dress suggested she belonged in a Boston parlor rather than a frontier jailhouse. "Madam, I'm duty-bound to investigate anything suspicious," Miles replied, though in truth, he'd been ignoring the bag precisely because he wasn't sure what he might find. In his 15 years wearing a badge, he'd seen enough to know that sometimes ignorance truly was bliss. The stagecoach hit a rut, sending them lurching against their seats. The sack tumbled onto its side and a soft mewling sound emerged. Miles raised an eyebrow. "You're smuggling a cat. It's not what you think," Olivia said, her voice barely audible above the coach's creaking timbers. "Most things aren't," he replied, reaching for the sack. "Marshal, I beg you," but his curiosity had gotten the better of him. Miles loosened the drawstring and peered inside, his breath caught in his throat as he stared down at what lay within. When he finally looked up at Olivia Whitman, his face had drained of color. "What have you done?" he whispered. Olivia met his gaze, her chin lifting slightly despite the fear in her eyes. "What I had to." Inside the sack, swaddled in a worn flannel blanket, a baby girl no more than 6 months old slumbered peacefully, one tiny fist curled against her cheek. Miles quickly retied the sack, leaving it open enough for air to circulate. "You stole a child." His voice was low and dangerous. "I saved her," Olivia countered, leaning forward as far as her restraints would allow. "And if you turn us in at the next station, you'll be condemning us both." The stagecoach rattled onward, but Miles's world had suddenly tilted off its axis. His orders had been clear: apprehend Olivia Whitman, wanted for stealing jewelry and cash from prominent citizens across the West. Nothing in his papers mentioned a kidnapped infant. "Explain," he demanded, his hand instinctively moving to rest on his holstered Colt. Olivia glanced out the window, gauging how much time she had before they reached the next way station. "Her name is Emma," she began, her voice steady despite the tears gathering in her eyes. "She's my sister's child. When Rebecca died of fever 3 months ago, her husband," she paused, swallowing hard, "Henry Blackwood sold their daughter to a mining baron and his wife who couldn't have children of their own." Miles frowned. "A man can't legally sell his child." "No, but a wealthy man can arrange adoption papers that leave out the $1,000 that changed hands," Olivia replied bitterly. "Blackwood drank away the money in a week. Meanwhile, that poor baby was being raised by people who saw her as property, not a person." The marshal remained silent, processing her words. The baby in the sack stirred, making small gurgling sounds. "The Montgomerys, the couple who bought her, they weren't kind people," Olivia continued. "Their housekeeper found bruises. When she threatened to report them, they dismissed her. That's when she came to find me in Carson City." "So you broke into their home and took the child," Miles concluded. "I took back my niece," Olivia corrected him. "The jewelry I'm accused of stealing belonged to my sister, family heirlooms Blackwood hadn't managed to pawn yet. The money." She looked down at her bound hands. "That was to start a new life for Emma and me in California." Miles leaned back against the leather seat, his mind racing. If what she said was true, arresting her would mean sending an infant back to abusive guardians. If she was lying. But something in her steady gaze told him she wasn't. Why hide her in a sack? Why not tell me from the beginning? Because men with badges don't typically listen to women's stories, Marshal Ingram. Her voice held no accusation, just a weary acknowledgement of the world they lived in. And I couldn't risk Emma being taken again. The coach began to slow as they approached Willow Creek Station, where Miles was supposed to transfer his prisoner to the eastbound stage that would take her back to Carson City for trial. "We'll be there in 5 minutes," he said quietly. "I need to decide what to do with you." Olivia's shoulders sagged. "Just let me feed her before you make your decision. She'll be getting hungry." Without waiting for permission, she awkwardly reached for the sack with her cuffed hands. Miles hesitated, then produced a small key from his vest pocket and unlocked her restraints. "Thank you," she whispered, rubbing her wrists before carefully lifting the baby from the sack. Miles watched as she cradled the infant with practiced ease, her entire demeanor transforming. Gone was the guarded prisoner. In her place sat a woman whose gentle smile and soft murmurs to the child spoke of genuine love. Emma's eyes fluttered open deep blue, just like her aunt's, and her tiny mouth worked soundlessly for a moment before breaking into a toothless grin of recognition. Something shifted in Miles's chest, a dull ache he couldn't name. "How were you planning to disappear?" he asked as the stagecoach rolled to a stop outside the station. Olivia glanced up, surprise flickering across her features. "I have a cousin in San Francisco. She doesn't know I'm coming, but she'll help us." Miles nodded slowly, then reached a decision that would forever alter the course of his life. "When we step down from this coach, you'll be Margaret Peters, my widowed sister, traveling with me and my niece to visit family in California." Hope bloomed in Olivia's eyes. "Why would you risk your badge for us?" "Because some laws aren't just," he replied simply, replacing his marshal's star with a plain bandana around his neck. "And because that child deserves better than what either the Montgomerys or a frontier orphanage would give her." As the driver called out their arrival, Miles gathered their belongings. "Stay close to me," he instructed, "and keep your head down until we're on the westbound stage." Olivia clutched Emma to her chest, a tremulous smile playing at her lips. "I don't know how to thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Miles warned. "We've got 500 miles of hard country between here and San Francisco." Little did either of them know that those 500 miles would forge a bond between them stronger than iron, tempered in the crucible of shared danger and unexpected tenderness. The westbound stagecoach proved more crowded than their previous transport. Miles and Olivia found themselves squeezed between a corpulent merchant who smelled of tobacco and a silver-haired missionary lady whose suspicious glances at the unmarried pair with a baby spoke volumes about her thoughts on their morality. "Your sister seems quite attached to the child," the missionary observed pointedly to Miles after they'd been traveling for several hours. Miles smiled tightly. "Margaret has been raising Emma since my wife passed. The good Lord saw fit to take Sarah before her time." The lie came easily, surprising even himself. In 15 years of upholding the law, Miles Ingram had never willingly stepped across to the other side. Yet here he was, not only aiding a fugitive but fabricating an entire history to protect her. The missionary's expression softened. "My condolences, Mr. Ingram. The Lord works in mysterious ways." "That he does, madam," Miles agreed, his gaze drifting to Olivia, who was softly humming to Emma as the baby dozed against her shoulder. As the day wore on, the stagecoach wound through rocky canyons and across sun-baked flats. When they stopped to change horses at a lonely outpost consisting of little more than a stable and a well, Miles helped Olivia down from the coach, his hand lingering at her waist perhaps a moment longer than necessary. "How are you holding up?" he asked quietly as they stretched their legs in the meager shade of a cottonwood. "Better than I expected," she admitted, adjusting Emma in her arms. "Though I worry about what happens when we reach San Francisco if my cousin can't help us." "One challenge at a time," Miles counseled. "First, we need to make it to the coast without being recognized." That particular challenge presented itself sooner than either expected. As they prepared to board the coach after their brief rest, a dust cloud appeared on the horizon, quickly materializing into a pair of riders pushing their mounts hard. Miles recognized the lead rider, immediately Deputy Frank Harris from Carson City, a man known more for his ambition than his ethics. Harris had made no secret of coveting Miles's marshal badge, and delivering a fugitive would certainly earn him points with the territorial governor. "Get on the coach," Miles muttered to Olivia. "Now." She complied without question, clutching Emma tightly as she climbed aboard. Miles casually positioned himself by the water trough, hat tipped low over his eyes as the riders approached. He'd abandoned his distinctive marshal's coat, but Harris knew his face well enough. "Afternoon, gentlemen," the station master called out as the riders reined in their lathered horses. "You've pushed those animals mighty hard." Harris dismounted, his eyes scanning the passengers reboarding the stage. "Official business. We're tracking a fugitive woman named Olivia Whitman, wanted for theft, believed to be traveling west." Miles kept his back turned, appearing to wash trail dust from his hands while straining to hear the conversation. "Haven't seen anyone fitting that description," the station master replied. "Only passengers I've had today are a drummer from St. Louis, an old missionary woman, and a fella traveling with his sister and her baby." Harris frowned, consulting a wanted poster he pulled from his saddlebag. "This is the woman we're after. Take a good look." The station master studied the paper, then shook his head. "Nope. Nobody like that's come through." Miles risked a glance over his shoulder. Harris was scanning the area with narrowed eyes, his gaze eventually landing on Miles's back. For one heart-stopping moment, Miles thought he'd been recognized. "You there," Harris called. "You look familiar." Miles turned slowly, keeping his expression neutral. "Do I?" The deputy approached, scrutinizing Miles's face. "Could swear I've seen you before." "I've got that kind of face," Miles replied with a shrug. "Been working cattle drives between Texas and Wyoming for the past 5 years. Harris's eyes narrowed further, but before he could press the point, the stagecoach driver called out that they were ready to depart. "If you see this woman," Harris said, thrusting the wanted poster toward Miles, "there's a reward for information leading to her capture." Miles studied the crude likeness of Olivia, noting with relief that the artist had rendered her with darker hair and a harsher expression than she possessed in reality. "I'll keep an eye out," he promised, handing back the poster before climbing into the waiting coach. As they pulled away, Miles caught Olivia's frightened gaze. "They're looking for you," he said unnecessarily. "What do we do now?" she whispered, careful not to be overheard by their fellow passengers. "We change plans," Miles decided. "At the next town, we'll leave the stage route. Too risky to continue with Harris on our trail." That night, when the stagecoach stopped at Bitter Springs, a ramshackle settlement boasting little more than a combination hotel and saloon, Miles quietly arranged to purchase a used wagon and a team of horses with most of his savings. By dawn, he, Olivia, and Emma were heading northwest on a little-used trail that would eventually connect with the California Trail, a longer route to San Francisco, but one less likely to be watched by lawmen. Their first day of independent travel passed in relative quiet, each lost in contemplation of how quickly their lives had changed. Miles found himself studying Olivia when she wasn't looking the graceful way she tended to Emma, the determined set of her jaw as she faced each new challenge, the rare but radiant smile that transformed her face when the baby did something to amuse her. "You're good with her," he observed that evening as they made camp in a protected hollow near a small stream. Olivia looked up from where she was bathing Emma in a tin basin. "I practically raised my sister. Rebecca was 10 years younger than me. Our mother died bringing her into the world." "That explains your devotion to her daughter," Miles said, stoking the small fire he'd built. "Wouldn't anyone do the same for family?" she asked. Miles shook his head. "Not everyone. Family can be complicated. You speak from experience," Olivia observed, wrapping Emma in a clean cloth. He nodded, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames. My father was the law in our town, expected me to follow in his footsteps. I did, but not for the reasons he thought. He wanted respect, power. I just wanted to help people who couldn't help themselves. Is that why you're helping us? Because we couldn't help ourselves. Miles considered her question as night settled around them, bringing with it the chorus of crickets and the distant howl of coyotes. I'm helping you because it's the right thing to do, he finally said. And because when I looked in that sack and saw Emma's face, something changed. I couldn't be part of sending her back to people who would hurt her. Olivia's eyes glistened in the firelight. Thank you for believing me, for risking everything. Get some rest, Miles advised, suddenly uncomfortable with the emotion thickening the air between them. I'll take first watch. As the days passed, their journey settled into a rhythm. During the day, they traveled as far as the horses could manage without being overtaxed. At night, they made camp away from the trail, sharing simple meals cooked over a small fire. Miles taught Olivia how to shoot his spare revolver, insisting she needed to know how to protect herself and Emma if the need arose. For her part, Olivia revealed more of her past, how she'd worked as a schoolteacher in St. Louis before coming west to join her sister, how she'd dreamed of opening her own school someday where girls could receive the same education as boys. What about you? She asked Miles one evening as they sat side by side on a fallen log, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of crimson and gold. Emma slept peacefully in a makeshift cradle nearby. What do you dream of when you're not chasing outlaws? Miles smiled wryly. Never gave it much thought. The badge has been my life for so long, and now you've given it up for us. Olivia's voice was soft, wondering. I haven't exactly turned it in properly, Miles pointed out. Right now, I'm just a marshal who's disappeared while transporting a prisoner. Eventually, they'll figure it out. Will you regret it? Miles looked at her then, really looked at her, the question in her blue eyes, the wind-tousled hair framing her face, the quiet strength she demonstrated every step of their journey. No, he said simply. I won't regret it. Something shifted between them in that moment. A recognition neither was ready to name, but both felt with startling clarity. Their peaceful progress was shattered the next afternoon when they crested a rise to find 3 riders blocking the trail ahead. Miles reined in the wagon, his hand moving instinctively to his holster. Get down, he instructed Olivia, who was already clutching Emma to her chest and sliding to the wagon bed floor. The lead rider, a lanky man with a pockmarked face, raised his hand in what might have been a greeting or a warning. Afternoon, folks. Bit off the main trail, ain't you? Just taking the scenic route, Miles replied evenly, noting the way the other 2 men had spread out to flank the wagon. None wore badges, but all were heavily armed. That's so, Pockmark grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. Mighty coincidental, seeing as we're looking for a marshal and a pretty lady with a baby, heard there might be a reward for information about them. Miles's blood ran cold. Harris must have spread the word about their disappearance. Can't help you there, he said. Just me and my family heading to California to start fresh. Your family, huh? The man's gaze flicked to where Olivia was partially visible in the wagon. Mind if the little lady shows her face? Just to satisfy our curiosity. Before Miles could respond, Olivia rose from her hiding place, Emma secured in a sling across her chest. Is there a problem, gentlemen? She asked with remarkable composure. The leader studied her face, then glanced down at a paper in his hand, undoubtedly Harris's wanted poster. Problem depends on who you are, madam. My name is Margaret Ingram, Olivia stated firmly. This is my husband Miles and our daughter Emma. We're heading to San Francisco to join my cousin's mercantile business. Miles felt a jolt at hearing her claim him as her husband, but he kept his expression neutral. The leader exchanged glances with his companions. Funny thing is, we heard the marshal and his fugitive might be traveling with a baby, and here you are off the main trail with a little one. Are you implying something about my wife? Miles asked, his voice dangerously quiet as he shifted his weight, ready to draw if necessary. The tension stretched between them, broken only when Emma began to fuss. Olivia bounced her gently, murmuring soothing words that seemed to calm not only the baby but the situation. The leader's eyes softened slightly at the domestic scene. No offense intended, just doing our job. And what job is that exactly? Miles pressed. You're not wearing badges. Concerned citizens, the man replied with another yellow grin. Looking to collect a reward for information on a fugitive. Well, we're just a family passing through, Miles said firmly. Now, if you'll excuse us, we need to make camp before nightfall. For a moment, it seemed the confrontation might escalate, but then the leader shrugged. No harm in asking, safe travels. He wheeled his horse around, his companions following suit. Miles and Olivia remained frozen until the riders disappeared over the ridge. They didn't believe us, Olivia whispered once they were alone. No, Miles agreed grimly. And they'll be back, probably with reinforcements. We need to move now. Under cover of approaching dusk, they abandoned the trail entirely, steering the wagon across rough country toward a line of hills in the distance. Miles drove with tense concentration, knowing that one broken wheel or lamed horse could spell disaster. They traveled through the night, stopping only when absolutely necessary to rest the horses or tend to Emma's needs. By dawn, they had put considerable distance between themselves and their pursuers, but Miles knew they couldn't outrun the rumor of a reward forever. We need a different plan, he told Olivia as they paused in the shadow of a rocky outcropping to water the horses. The wagon makes us too visible, too slow. Olivia nodded, her face drawn with exhaustion but her eyes clear. What do you suggest? Miles studied the terrain. There's a mining town about 20 miles west of here, Silver Peak. Small enough that news might not have reached them yet, big enough to have a stagecoach connection. If we can get there without being spotted, we might be able to book passage on the next stage to California. And if we're recognized? Miles didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a small leather pouch. I've been saving this for an emergency, he said, tipping 2 gold wedding bands into his palm. They were my parents, never had cause to use them myself. Olivia's eyes widened as understanding dawned. You're suggesting we actually become Mr. and Mrs. Ingram, just on paper, Miles clarified, feeling unaccountably nervous. A marriage certificate would make our story more convincing if anyone questions us. And a husband can't be compelled to testify against his wife. A legal safeguard, Olivia murmured, staring at the rings gleaming in Miles's weathered palm. Exactly. He nodded, ignoring the strange disappointment her practical response elicited. Once we reach San Francisco, you can file for annulment if you wish. Olivia considered his proposal as she adjusted Emma in her arms. It's a sensible precaution, she finally agreed. If Silver Peak has a preacher or justice of the peace. Miles closed his hand around the rings, oddly relieved. Then let's get moving. We should reach town by nightfall if we push on. Silver Peak proved to be a dusty collection of wooden buildings clinging to the side of a barren mountain, its fortunes clearly in decline as the silver veins that had given it birth slowly played out. They arrived as the setting sun cast long shadows across the town's single main street. Miles left Olivia and Emma waiting in the wagon while he reconnoitered, checking the saloon and general store for any sign of wanted posters or gossip about a missing marshal. Finding neither, he secured a room at the modest hotel, then sought out the town's aging justice of the peace. Judge Holbrook was initially reluctant to perform a wedding ceremony so late in the day, but the sight of Miles's gold coins quickly changed his mind. Within the hour, Olivia stood beside Miles in the judge's cluttered office, Emma sleeping peacefully in her arms as they exchanged simple vows. Do you, Miles Ingram, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? The judge intoned, peering at them over spectacles perched on his bulbous nose. I do, Miles replied, surprising himself with the steadiness of his voice. And do you, Olivia Whitman, Margaret Peters, Miles corrected swiftly, his heart hammering at the near slip. The judge blinked owlishly. Yes, of course. Do you, Margaret Peters, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Olivia's gaze met Miles's, something unreadable flickering in her eyes. I do, she said softly. Then, by the authority vested in me by the territory of Nevada, I pronounce you husband and wife. Judge Holbrook yawned. You may kiss your bride. Miles hesitated, then leaned forward to place a chaste kiss on Olivia's cheek. But at the last moment, she turned her head slightly, and his lips brushed the corner of her mouth instead. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth coursing through him. Congratulations, the judge said, already reaching for the bottle of whiskey visible on his bookshelf. Marriage certificate will be ready in the morning. Outside in the cool desert night, Miles and Olivia walked in silence toward the hotel, the weight of what they'd done settling between them. Their marriage might be a legal fiction designed to protect them, but Miles couldn't deny the very real emotion that had surged through him when Olivia had said, I do. At the hotel room door, Miles cleared his throat awkwardly. I'll sleep in the chair, he offered. You and Emma take the bed. Olivia nodded, her fingers absently twisting the gold band now adorning her left hand. Miles, she began hesitantly, I want you to know that I'm grateful for everything. No need for gratitude between us, he replied. We're in this together now. As he settled into the uncomfortable wooden chair for the night, watching Olivia and Emma sleeping peacefully in the narrow bed, Miles was struck by how quickly his orderly life had transformed. A week ago, he'd been Marshal Ingram, respected lawman with a spotless record. Now he was a fugitive with a fake wife and a baby that wasn't his, running from the very law he'd sworn to uphold. And the strangest part? He didn't regret a moment of it. Morning brought news that the westbound stage would arrive the following day. Miles purchased tickets while Olivia gathered supplies for the final leg of their journey. Their plan was simple: board the stage as Mr. and Mrs. Ingram with their infant daughter, travel to Sacramento, then take a riverboat to San Francisco where they would seek out Olivia's cousin. What happened after that remained unspoken between them. Their preparations were interrupted by a commotion in the street. Miles's hand went instinctively to his holster as a group of riders thundered into town, sending pedestrians scattering. His stomach clenched when he recognized Deputy Harris at the head of the posse. They've found us, he told Olivia, who had rushed to the hotel window at the sound. We need to leave, now. The stage doesn't come until tomorrow, she reminded him, already gathering their meager belongings. Then we'll have to find another way, Miles decided. Go out the back. I'll meet you behind the livery stable in 10 minutes. Olivia clutched his arm. What are you going to do? Create a diversion, he said grimly, and make sure Harris looks in the wrong direction. Before she could protest, Miles strode out of the hotel and directly into the saloon across the street, where Harris and his men were already questioning the bartender. Miles took a seat at a table with his back to the door, ordered a whiskey, and waited. It didn't take long. He heard the spurs jangling behind him, felt the hush fall over the room as Harris spotted him. Well, well, the deputy drawled. Marshal Ingram, fancy meeting you here. Miles turned slowly, affecting surprise. Harris, what brings you to this God-forsaken place? The deputy's hand rested on his holster. Looking for you, Marshal, and the fugitive you were supposed to be transporting to Carson City. Folks are saying you helped her escape. Is that what they're saying? Miles sipped his whiskey nonchalantly. That's what the evidence suggests, Harris replied, his eyes hard. Where is she, Ingram? Miles leaned back in his chair. If I knew that, I wouldn't be drinking alone in a two-bit saloon, now would I? The woman got the drop on me while I was sleeping, took my horse, my money, and disappeared. I've been tracking her for days. Harris scoffed. You expect me to believe Olivia Whitman overpowered a seasoned lawman? She had help, Miles improvised. Man waiting for her at the Willow Creek station. I didn't get a good look at him, but they headed east together. I tracked them as far as the Ruby Mountains before losing the trail. East, Harris repeated skeptically. All reports indicate they were heading west, Miles shrugged. False trail, obviously. She's smarter than you give her credit for. For a long moment, Harris studied Miles's face, searching for deception. Miles met his gaze steadily, years of poker games serving him well in this most important bluff of his life. Finally, Harris nodded curtly. "We'll check your story, Ingram, if you're lying." "Why would I lie?" Miles spread his hands innocently. "She made me look like a fool. I want her caught as much as you do." After Harris and his men departed eastward, following Miles's false lead, Miles slipped out of town to the meeting point where Olivia waited anxiously with Emma. "They're gone," he assured her as he helped her mount the horse he'd purchased from the livery stable. "But they'll figure out I lied eventually. We need to move fast." Rather than wait for the stage, they rode hard across country, taking turns carrying Emma. Miles pushed them to their limits, knowing that once Harris discovered his deception, the deputy would return with a vengeance. 3 grueling days later, they crossed the California border, stopping in a small farming community to rest their exhausted mounts. The town was hosting a harvest festival, the streets filled with families enjoying simple pleasures after the summer's hard work. "We should blend in," Miles suggested, offering Olivia his arm as they walked among the celebration. Just another family enjoying the festivities. For a few precious hours, they allowed themselves to relax, wandering through stalls selling homemade preserves and handcrafted goods. Miles won a rag doll for Emma at a ring toss game, and Olivia's delighted laugh when he presented it to the baby sent a warm surge through his chest. As afternoon faded into evening, a fiddler struck up a lively tune in the town square, and couples began to dance. "Mrs. Ingram," Miles said with exaggerated formality, extending his hand to Olivia. "Would you do me the honor?" She hesitated, glancing at Emma, who was now happily situated in a makeshift sling across Olivia's chest. "I'm not sure we should." "One dance," he insisted gently. "We've earned a moment of normalcy, don't you think?" With a shy smile, Olivia placed her hand in his. "I'm not very good at this," she warned as he led her to join the other dancers. "Neither am I," Miles admitted, placing his hand tentatively at her waist. "But I reckon we can figure it out together." As they moved awkwardly at first, then with growing confidence to the fiddle's cheerful melody, Miles found himself studying Olivia's face in the golden light of the setting sun. The weeks of hard travel had left their mark. Her skin was tanned, her hands roughened, but to Miles, she had never looked more beautiful. Emma gurgled happily between them, tiny hands reaching up to pat Miles's chest as they danced. The baby had come to recognize him, even reaching for him sometimes when she was fussy. Miles had never considered himself particularly good with children, but this little one had claimed a piece of his heart without even trying. "What are you thinking?" Olivia asked, noticing his contemplative expression. Miles hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I'm thinking that this feels right, the 3 of us together like this." Olivia's steps faltered briefly. "Miles, I know," he said quickly. "It's just a legal arrangement. A necessity for our safety, but Olivia." He stopped dancing, his hand still holding hers. What if it could be more? Her eyes widened, a mixture of hope and uncertainty flickering across her face. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that when I opened that sack and saw Emma, everything changed. And when I got to know you, your courage, your determination to protect this child at all costs, I found myself admiring you, caring for you." He drew a deep breath. "I'm saying that somewhere between Nevada and here, I fell in love with you both." Tears sprang to Olivia's eyes. "You barely know me." "I know enough," Miles insisted. "I know you're the kind of woman who would risk everything for family. I know you dream of educating young girls to be strong and independent. I know you sing to Emma when you think no one's listening, and you have a weakness for peppermint candy, and you're braver than any outlaw I've ever chased." A tear slipped down Olivia's cheek. "And what about your life, your career? You've given up everything for us." "I've gained more than I lost," Miles said simply. "If you'll have me, truly have me, not just as a name on a certificate, I want to build a life with you and Emma. A real life." For a heart-stopping moment, Olivia remained silent, her eyes searching his face as if looking for any sign of doubt or deception. Miles waited, scarcely breathing, aware that he'd never wanted anything as much as he wanted her answer to be yes. Then, with Emma cradled between them, Olivia rose on tiptoes and pressed her lips to his a gentle kiss that spoke volumes. When she pulled back, her smile was radiant despite the tears still shining in her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll have you." The fiddle played on as they stood in the middle of the dancing couples, their foreheads touching, 3 hearts beating in unison as the first stars appeared in the twilight sky. 2 weeks later, Miles, Olivia, and Emma arrived in San Francisco. Olivia's cousin Clara welcomed them with open arms, offering them temporary lodging in her spacious home while they established themselves in the city. Miles found work as a security consultant for several prominent businesses, his experience as a lawman proving valuable in the rapidly growing metropolis. Olivia, with Clara's connections, secured a position teaching at a progressive school for girls where Emma became the unofficial mascot, adored by students and faculty alike. They maintained their vigilance, always watching for signs that Harris or other authorities might have traced them to California. But as months passed without incident, they gradually relaxed into their new lives, their pretend marriage becoming more real with each passing day. On Emma's first birthday, as they celebrated with a small gathering of new friends, Miles presented Olivia with a deed to a modest house near the school where she taught. "Our home," he said simply. "If you still want it, if you still want me." Olivia's answer was to kiss him soundly, much to the delight of their guests. Later that night, as Emma slept peacefully in her crib, Miles and Olivia sat on the porch of their new home, watching the fog roll in from the bay. "Do you ever regret it?" Olivia asked, leaning against his shoulder. "Opening that sack when I told you not to," Miles chuckled, his arm tightening around her. "It was the best decision I ever made, though I nearly had a heart attack at the time." "I was so afraid," she admitted. "Afraid you'd take Emma away, afraid you wouldn't believe me." "I'm glad I did," Miles said, kissing the top of her head, "because it led me to you, to us." As the city lights twinkled through the gathering mist, Miles reflected on the strange journey that had brought them here from a suspicious marshal and a desperate woman to a family bound by love rather than law. All because he'd opened a sack he'd been warned to leave alone. Some risks, he decided, were worth taking, and some treasures were worth protecting, no matter the cost. "I love you," he whispered into Olivia's hair. "Both of you, more than I ever thought possible." Olivia turned in his arms, her face illuminated by the soft glow from the window. "And we love you, Miles Ingram, our protector, our provider, our home." In that moment, miles from where their story began, a former marshal and a former fugitive found the peace they'd been seeking all along, not in a destination, but in each other's arms.